Have you ever driven along a deserted road at night and felt that something was wrong? I have, and it was on the A229 in Kent that my life changed forever. What would you do if you saw a figure dressed in white appear in your rearview mirror on one of the most cursed roads you'll ever see? If you like stories that will make your hair stand on end, subscribe now. Give it a like and comment. I wouldn't go there. Today, I'm going to tell you what happened to me that night and why the Bride of Bluebell Hill is a legend you'll never forget. I've never been one to believe in ghosts. I've always been the kind of person who laughs at haunting stories, who dismisses reports of apparitions as collective hysteria or overactive imagination. But everything changed that night on the A229 road near Bluebell Hill in Kent. It was a cold autumn evening and fog was beginning to form, hanging over the road like a ghostly veil. I was returning home after a long day at work, and the A229 was the quickest route. The road is known for being winding and deserted at night, but I had never given much thought to the rumors surrounding the place. Until then, as I drove along, I began to notice something strange. The radio, which was playing soft music, suddenly began to fail. Static cut through the melody, and I tried tuning in to another station, but the sound only got worse. Then felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was no one behind me. The road was deserted. That's when I saw something on the side of the road, a figure dressed in white with a veil covering her face. She was standing still, as if waiting for something or someone. My heart raced, and I hesitantly slowed down. As I got closer, she simply disappeared. I stopped the car for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. It was then that I remembered the stories I'd heard about the Bride of Bluebell Hill. They say she was a young woman called Suzanne, who died in a car crash in the 1960s shortly after her wedding. Since then, her spirit has wandered the road, searching for her lost fiancé. I always thought these stories were just urban legends, something to scare unwary motorists. But that night, I wasn't so sure anymore. Have you ever had an experience like that? After that first vision, I couldn't get the Bride of Bluebell Hill out of my head. It was as if that image was engraved in my mind, haunting me even when I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. I decided to investigate the legend further. I spoke to locals in nearby pubs, such as the Bell Inn, where the stories seemed to come alive with every pint of beer. An older man with a heavy Kent accent told me that he himself had seen the bride years ago. She was standing in the middle of the road, looking straight at me, he said, his eyes fixed on the empty glass. When I stopped the car, she disappeared, but the back seat got cold. This story made me even more intrigued and scared, but it was that night, when I was driving home along the A229 again, that everything changed. The fog was thicker than ever, and I could barely see over the bonnet of the car. The radio once again began to fail, and the static seemed to whisper something I couldn't understand. It was then that I saw her again. This time, she was standing in the middle of the road, facing my car. I hit the brakes hard, feeling the tires skid on the damp asphalt. When the car stopped, she was only a few meters away, looking straight at me. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes seemed empty, but at the same time filled with a deep sadness. Before I could react, she disappeared again. But this time, I felt a presence in the back seat. The air inside the car became chilly, and I could feel something breathing close to my ear. My heart was pounding so hard that I was afraid it would explode. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw her face reflected in the glass. She was sitting behind me, with a look that seemed to penetrate my soul. She whispered something I'll never forget. "Have you seen my fiancé?" I don't know how, but I managed to get out of there. When I got home, I was shaking and could hardly sleep. That encounter changed everything for me. What would you do if you saw a ghost in your car? The next morning, I woke up with a feeling of unease that I couldn't explain. The image of the bride of Bluebell Hill was still fresh in my mind, and I knew I needed to find out more about her. Who was Suzanne? What really happened on that fateful night in 1965? That's when I decided to dive headfirst into the story behind the curse. I started my research at the local library in Maidstone, where I found old newspapers from the time. The headlines were clear: Tragedy on A229. Bride dies in horrific accident. Suzanne, a 22-year-old, was on her way to her honeymoon when the car she and her fiancé were in collided with another vehicle. The impact was so violent that they both died instantly. But what struck me most was a detail that the newspapers didn't mention. Suzanne was wearing her wedding dress at the time of the accident. According to local accounts, she never had the chance to live her big day, and her spirit was trapped on that road, unable to move on. I spoke to a local historian, Margaret, who told me that the legend of the Bride of Bluebell Hill is one of the oldest and most persistent in Kent. Many motorists swear they've seen Suzanne over the years, she said as she flicked through an old book. Some say she turns up asking for a lift. Others claim she simply watches from afar, but they all agree on one thing: she's looking for something or someone. Margaret also showed me records of unexplained accidents that have occurred on the A229 over the years. Drivers who swore they saw a woman in white in the middle of the road, only to swerve and crash into trees or barriers. Others have reported feeling a presence in the car, as if someone was sitting next to them, only to discover that they were alone. It was then that I realized the Bride of Bluebell Hill wasn't just a legend. She was a real presence, a force that continued to haunt that road decades after her death. Do you think places can really be cursed? After everything I've experienced and discovered, I've never been the same. The experience on the A229 left me with a feeling of unease that I can't explain. I've been back on the road a few times, but I've never seen the bride again. However, every time I pass by, I feel a presence, as if she's still around, watching. The legend of the Bride of Bluebell Hill is one of the scariest, and no wonder. It represents the fear of the unknown, the pain of a tragedy that has never been overcome, and the idea that some places really are cursed. The A229 road, with its winding bends and dense fog, seems to be a portal to something we can't understand. As I drove along that road for the last time, I thought of Suzanne, a young woman who never had the chance to live her big day, trapped in an eternal cycle of pain and longing. Will she ever find peace? Or will she continue to wander the road, looking for her lost fiancé until the end of time? If you're driving along the A229 at night, be careful. You never know who might appear in your rearview mirror. And if you see a figure dressed in white standing by the side of the road, don't stop. The Bride of Bluebell Hill could be looking for something or someone. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel for more real horror stories. Leave a like and comment. I would never drive down the A229 at night. Share this video with your friends and let's discover the darkest mysteries together. And remember, some stories are more real than we'd like to believe.